Good afternoon and welcome to everybody. We are so glad that you are a part of our Tuesday afternoon. We have another webinar as part of our webinar series, and today we are looking forward to learning a little bit more about project management. Orson John is joining us from Goddard Space Flight Center. He has been a judge with us for the last couple of years and a strong supporter of everything that we do here. So we're really excited to have him back and giving this presentation. He is in reliability. He's a reliability engineer, and that just changed. I think it was different last year, wasn't it, Orson? Quality? Is it quality? Yeah. So congratulations to you on the new title. And anyways, we just so appreciate every year you coming back and presenting this for us. And hopefully we'll walk away with some new tools in our tool belt as to how to be effective in our project management. With that being said, I am going to turn it over to you and let you go ahead and begin. And Orson, I didn't ask you when we first began, will you be sharing your screen for the presentation?
Yes.
Perfect. Alrighty, you should have access.
Wonderful. I'll wait for access. Hello, thank you, Christine, and thank you to First Nations Launch for inviting me to speak on behalf of this workshop of project management. Thank you for taking the time to join this afternoon or this evening where you are. We begin with project management workshop, and this is the 13th annual First Nations Launch, and it's an honor, it's a privilege to present. My name is Orson John Ya'at'e. I am Navajo originally from the state of New Mexico, and currently I am based out of NASA Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland. A few years ago, we had begun this project management workshop with a colleague of mine, Dr. Juan Ramon. He was the Deputy Director of our Engineering and Technology Directorate or organization here at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. And so a lot of the material here is really credited to Dr. Juan Ramon, as he was a project management specialist, and he would oftentimes teach in the universities on project management. And so I give credit to Dr. Juan Ramon. I begin here with just a brief introduction before we move forward, that some of the characteristics and elements that are going to be talked about tonight, from a very overview perspective, there may be characteristics and elements that are applicable to the development of and participation of First Nations Launch, but it also elements that can carry over in which you probably have already been conducting in your student life, in your organizational life, in your family life, right? So a lot of these elements and characteristics may seem redundant. I may repeat a few things, but repeating the few items, that just emphasizes the importance and the necessity as it incorporates into First Nations Launch. So I will do my best to present and project management and some characteristics and elements that make up project management, and how this form of art can be very fundamental into the development for each team to meet the challenge and to accomplish the challenges of First Nations Launch. At NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, right, we are a NASA facility, and we do not do things on our own, right? NASA Goddard, we always work in teams. We always work through projects. We always work together. Parts, whether it's sounding rocket development, whether it's satellite development, or balloon payload development, or even instrumentations that fly on satellites for various science objectives, whether it's Earth, interplanetary, galaxy, heliophysics, study of the sun, or just simply operating or measuring characteristics of the environment of our Earth, right? So these projects and these teams, they are needed to work together. And so teams, I do want to emphasize that teams, just like you and your team, you're reaching to identify a common goal. You're interdependent upon one another because a team works together, and they all offer different complementary skill sets. And that's exactly what we do at NASA. We always have projects. Projects are always time defined, right? Where we have a start date and an end date. There's an end objective. And with that end objective, there must be time associated with that. And cost control. What items are cost oriented, what things are to be purchased, what things are need to be developed. And so there's always a cost control along with the project. And a limited scope, there's always going to be a purpose. You're working together to meet a specific purpose. And so I want to begin with this simply, that a project must be planned, it must be organized, it must be implemented, but it also must be controlled. It must be managed. And so at NASA, what you are doing from the development of First Nations launch to meet a specific challenge, what you are implementing from, let's say, a team leader perspective or team member perspective is the same skill set and tools that we often do here at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. And so I simply begin with this, that project management at a very basic definition. Project management is simply the management of a project, because a project has a start date, has an end date, but it also produces a tangible product. And so project management, the management of the start, the end, and that tangible product, the management aspect, the project management aspect is an art and it's a science. And it's a science because it's the foundation of the art of leadership, learning to influence, learning to delegate, learning to lead, learning to manage, all of it incorporated. And so project management, a good project manager will always demonstrate vision, will always look at the tangible product, will always look at the system perspective. And out of that vision, out of that end product, the motivation is almost as if a byproduct, right? Like for First Nations launch, I have a specific challenge. That's my vision, to see that rocket, a sounding rocket fly, and to see my report, all the I's dotted and the T's crossed, and that is my vision. And out of that is the motivation where I can now start to coordinate people to achieve those objectives because we have a vision. And that's what project management is. And what is the purpose of that for First Nations launch? Well, First Nations launch, a project management, a team leader may operate as a project manager. So a team leader will implement the tools that a project manager implements as they develop a specific product. So a team leader will need to define the vision, will need to define the motivation, will find the motivation and utilize that to coordinate individuals to meet the objectives of First Nations launch. Whether your team is participating in the Gateway Challenge, whether your team is participating in the Moon Challenge, or even the engineering aspects of the Mars engineering challenges. Whether you're completing in these three different challenges, the art of project management is so vital into meeting this objective. And so here at NASA, I had mentioned that we work in projects and we work in teams. We work to meet a specific goal. Well, NASA, we have this thing called project life cycle, right? It's a terminology to define what the start and the end date would be for an entire project. And when we look at it from this perspective, there's individual areas in which it can be defined and it can be broken down into. So for example, with NASA project life cycle, we first begin with science and we end with science, but there's individual areas that can be accomplished in meeting the beginning to the end. So at NASA, we may break down that life cycle into phases: pre-phase A, phase B, phase C, right? We have a testing phase, we have a launch phase, we have a data analyzation phase, right? So there's different aspects of project. When we look at it from a project life cycle, we can start to define phases throughout that project, and that can simply be jotted down on a piece of paper, A to Z. Start to finish. Developing and visualizing a timeline is so key when operating as a team leader, when operating as a project manager, because that's essentially what a team leader does. And so when we first began looking at project management, in order to manage a project, in order to visualize its start to its end and its tangible product, in order to look at that and the art of identifying what key areas must be developed, I must look at it from a timeline perspective and saying, okay, now what key areas and what key timeline, what is going to be applicable to my timeline? If I can develop a timeline of what needs to be met for First Nations launch, then that is the first step in which I can start to organize and I can start to execute aspects of the project that can be well tracked and that can be well managed. So for First Nations launch, we want to look at it as a team leader, as a faculty advisor, influencing and being the wisdom part of leading the student teams. But as a student, whether you are operating as a team leader, whether you're operating as a team member, visualizing the First Nations launch timeline is an example of beginning how to manage your project. Because now if you can start to outline your timeline, you start to develop and understand what is needed for each phase. You start to understand the objectives of each phase. You start to understand the major reviews that are needed, what reports and what verbal presentations will need to be held at specific key dates, and what activities and what objectives need to be met to meet those phases. CDR, critical design review. I promise I'll get it. Proposals, right? So if you can visualize the FNL timeline, then as a project manager, as a team lead, this is a really good step for one to take in understanding, okay, then what needs to be done. And if we can take that a step further, we can start to really go into the details of a timeline and what is needed for each time. What are the objectives for each timeline to be met? And in order for us to do so, we must start to talk about a schedule, because a timeline is just outlining what needs to be done. A schedule can now be utilized to develop and contain more of the details that are needed for each phase. So key elements of what a schedule can look like, and key terminologies that I will pepper throughout this entire presentation, is a task, right? A task is simply the higher level subdivision of work scope, right? So a task is, okay, then this needs to be done. And then there's individual activities that can be met to meet the task. So we have task, and then we have all of these activities below that. A combination of all those activities complete the task. Sequencing is what order of activities and milestones need to be met. So what order of activity is there? Activity A, B, and C need to be met in order to produce the task. So sequencing is the order in which activities need to be taken place, right? In order for you to launch something that needs to be glued together or held together, riveted together, or fastened together. Well, the sequence is, in order for it to be complete, all the individual pieces need to be integrated. Which pieces need to be integrated first, second, third, and fourth. So that's what a sequence is. Milestone. I will use the word milestone to identify your reports and those due dates, PDR, CDR, right? Those are milestone events that are going to be almost second nature to you. Duration is so vital and so key. How long is an activity going to take? And I'll use an example. If your activity is to simply use adhesives to glue your fins to the airframe, to your rocket, how long is that adhesive going to take in order for you to pick it up and start to do more work with it? Well, the duration is for you to identify how long is your cure time. Right? That can fit into your schedule. Critical path. What events are needed and what events need to be developed? And then I won't mention Slack as much, but there are some areas that are less of a priority, but you don't want to let those delay even further. So I will briefly talk about the purpose of a schedule, and then I'll talk about FNL. The purpose of a schedule is to develop functions, right? A schedule is a tool for identifying what the project manager and the team intends to do and when they intend to do it. So The functions that make up a schedule is simply the integration of all of these individual tasks and activities and just simply puts in a logical flow. It establishes a timeline for achieving objectives. It's helpful for setting work priorities. I mentioned in the beginning that there's elements of project management that you may have already been incorporating into your own student life. Helpful for setting work priorities. It's helpful for the development of costs and time-phase cost estimate and resource plans, right? Like where can we spend our money? What needs to be spent? Where does it need to be spent? So looking at it from a timeline and a schedule perspective is so vital. And one of the things that is vital, that is resourceful for a schedule is it provides a means to measure work accomplishment. We love to celebrate wins. We love to celebrate accomplishments, while a schedule can help us celebrate and help us measure those accomplishments. And it also helps us identify problems. What are some items that need to be identified early? And a schedule can help with that. And so developing a credible schedule is critical to the project success. So as a team leader, as a team member, it's vital for one to look at it from a schedule perspective, right? Because for FNL, whether you're participating in the Gateway, the Moon, or the Mars engineering challenges, you're going to look at the flight profile for the Mars flight profile, right? There's key elements that are needed. You're just not launching a rocket, but there's elements of the payload that need to be met and the objectives of those payloads. So functions need to be identified, right? Requirements. Who is going to be in my team? What faculty advisors are going to be needed? How much money is the school going to give, or how much funding do I have, whether it's coming in different areas, right? Identifying subsystem tasks. The development of a rocket, you have many different mechanisms and moving parts, and identifying those tasks and activities to complete that. Whether you're customizing your nose cone, how long is it going to take for you to customize your nose cone? Establish a timeline for meeting these objectives. And so a schedule is important because it helps to identify and establish the necessary elements in order for the objectives to be met, right? Because a schedule can help you identify when major milestone reviews are done, what activities need to be met in order for that milestone to be met, right? Schedule meetings in advance. So knowing and understanding, finding a consistent time for your team members to meet. It's helpful for identifying work priorities. This one is big because as students, you may be a full-time student, part-time student. You may also have a family. You may also have work. And so how do you balance all of that and then also work towards the development of an engineering challenge such as First Nations Launch? Having a schedule for your team up front helps alleviate problems later. Develop a budget and a cost estimate and a resource plan, right? What resources are needed and how does my budget fit into that? And I mentioned earlier that it's a really great way to measure progress, that this beginning phase, we've accomplished all of this. Let's keep the momentum going. Let's keep the motivation going. We are excited to build a rocket. We are excited to launch a rocket. We are excited to meet a challenge, right? There's all those motivating factors that can help you to develop the skill set necessary to meet the challenge. And all of these can overflow into your student life, into your professional life. Planning a project and creating the schedule, right? First, you got to set goals. You got to set the objectives. You got to list a task. You got to list and estimate how long those tasks need to be completed. You're going to determine at what order do things need to fall in, and then you're going to assign resources. So you're going to develop all of these key elements and you're going to input all of these key elements, and you're going to develop a schedule. You're going to develop a schedule. And so for First Nations Launch, you're going to look at your competition requirements and your deliverables. Oh, it's wonderful, isn't it? First Nations Launch. It's all on a centralized website. There's the student handbook right there, and that student handbook is perfectly outlined, right? It's detailed enough for one to identify what requirements and what deliverables need to be met at every specific milestone. So you're going to look at that, and that you're going to set the goals, you're going to set the objectives for every phase and every milestone of the project, right? You're going to set up your calendars. You're going to list a task. You're going to, what tasks need to be completed. And as part of that task, what activities need to be met within that task. For preliminary design review, for PDR, what objectives need to be met? If you can put that on the calendar and say, okay, then 6 weeks in advance, 4 weeks in advance, this is what must be accomplished. So that a week prior to submitting your report, or even 2 weeks prior, however you so choose as a team, you're coming up with common goals, you know exactly what needs to be done. Because now you're looking at your task, okay? And so a task, in order for meet the objectives of PDR, your task you gotta consider your presentations, you gotta consider your written reports, you gotta consider your vehicle requirements, right? What kind of rocket kit are you going to purchase? What kind of rocket kit are you going to design and utilize? If you're going to do the Mars Engineering Challenge, your payload requirements, right? You're going to look at all of these aspects of requirements. You're going to look at your budget. All of these can be examples of tasks, because under each task, there's a list of activities that must be accomplished. And so creating a schedule using simply that, okay, then at this particular 4 weeks in advance of my report, this needs to be done. 2 weeks in advance before the report is due, this needs to be done. And 1 week before the report is due, this must be done. And so now you're driving, you're organizing, now you're working in a schedule-oriented environment, and you're understanding the reality of looking at it from a timeline perspective, and you're implementing the art of management, you're implementing the art of leadership so that you can meet the objectives. Estimate duration. I mentioned about cure time for adhesives. If you're going to CDR and you're wanting to deliver, right? Or painting, the aesthetics. Oh, students are wonderful with their creativity and designing their rocket kits. I remember a few years. How long is your cure time for your paint? How long is your cure time for the aesthetics of it, right? Or the estimation of when your adhesives are going to cure enough for you to produce the next, move on to the next part. You're outlining these steps because you want to keep a logical flow of what needs to be done. So when it becomes for report time, you know exactly what needs to be reported. And now you understand that when you develop and create a schedule, you can start to understand and implement resources, team member task and communication. How is our team members going to be communicating with one another? What form of calendar are we going to use? Does all my team members have access to this calendar? Do all my team members, can we all communicate with one another? I have a challenge communicating from iPhone to Android, right? Some of them accept group text, another doesn't accept group text. And so, you got to understand and visualize in advance, understanding that perspective. And so as a team leader, visualizing and creating is helpful and is resourceful to help alleviate the need of a lot of stress later. Defining the project and the challenge, right? Milestones. A milestone is simply the measurable progress toward achieving an activity or a task or an objective. It's simply the moment in which you report the progress of your project. Preliminary design review, critical design review, those are your milestones. And so at each milestone, you're going to demonstrate the accomplishment of the work scope. Your student handbook has that. You're going to look at what key stakeholders, how are they playing a role in my development, right? Signifying and achieving the major objectives, right? You're going to see where the completion is. The design review, are you going to test some items? Are you going to deliver? When is the delivery of these items going to arrive? And you look at risk. What items are of my concern? What items am I concerned about as a team? What items are we concerned about from our team perspective? And so you're going to allow this project development and schedule, you've set your schedule, and now you're starting to get into the little bit more details of what your challenge is. And so at each major milestone, you're going to look and present your schedule saying, okay, at this major milestone review, we're going to present our purpose and where we stand in reference to that purpose. So for First Nations launch, you're going to look at your milestones. You're going to look at your student handbook. You're going to look at the criteria and the expectations of what is outlined in the handbook. Oh, we love written reports, and those written reports, they can really communicate the progress of where you are. Know when your deadlines are and document progress along the way to achieve that deadline. That's what a schedule can do. You're always updating your schedule based upon where you stand, where the team stands, and you can document progress, right? You can journal, you can document where you stand so that when it comes time to meet these milestone objectives, you already are there, you know what exactly to say, and now you can work together to make it happen. And progress, how are you meeting objectives and requirements? How is the task going to be accountable? If you assign a task, if you need to design and do your rocket simulations and rock sim, who is going to be the point of contact? How is that accountability going to take? Are they writing? Is there a summary of what the activities were done so that that can be incorporated into the report? Challenges and problems. Who know who to contact? What is the centralized location for you to communicate challenges and issues, right? When you develop, and when one develops and defines the project, then you look at your project. I want to build a successful payload and a rocket. I want my rocket to be the best. I want it to meet the objectives. Now you look at your rocket, now you're looking at all the subsystems, the booster section, right? The sustainer, right? The forward aspect, the nose cone, right? The airframe, the fins. You're going to start looking at individual components, and then you're going to start to break them down. So now you can start to develop your task. In order for my booster section to be complete, that's my task. Then I can start to list the individual activities below that, right? My retainers, right? My fins, what kind of design is it going to be? What kind of rocket motor am I going to let Frank and Mark guide me with, right? What do they say? What are the requirements? What can I do? Your payload, your airframe, your recovery system, right? Your parachutes, your descent rate. You're going to look at all of these individual tasks, individual activities that make up what the task is going to be. And so your task, the characteristics, they must be precise, they must be detailed, they must be significant, because you want the best product so you can meet the challenge. And I look at that little post-it note down there. I talk about NASA, and I talk about project management, but it could be as simple as you documenting from a very brainstorm perspective, simply putting things such as post-it notes in an organized, logical flow of what items must be done, right? Because we have resources here. Oftentimes I am a paper-oriented individual, so I visualize things with post-its versus utilizing all the apps that are out there, because that's just, there's things in my mind that I visualize. And so when working with teams, I start to look at what my task is from a top-down perspective. I want my nose cone. I want to design my nose cone. Okay, then what needs to be done to meet the development of that nose cone? Am I going to 3D print it? What's going to be in the 3D print? Am I going to add a camera? Am I going to add a GPS tracker? How is it going to be mounted into the sustainer section for it not to fall off? Right. So from a top-down perspective, I have my customized nose cone and what elements are needed to meet that. And then I look at it from a bottoms-up perspective. Okay, and if I'm going to 3D print, what things in my 3D printer must be done in order for me to produce the customizable nose cone? So developing and identifying challenges and identifying tasks is so important, because now you're starting to develop, okay, then we got progress we got to make. We are starting to identify what is important, what items must be done. Then one can start to estimate tasks. If I'm going to produce a customizable nose cone, I must estimate how long it's going to take to produce, right? You're determining the duration, the period between start and ending. In order for me to produce this, how long is it going to take? What resources must be done? And so as a project manager, as a team leader, as a team member, right? Because you're there to support your team leader. You're there to support one another. Each of us, every individual, you apply realistic estimations. If you're going to develop and design something, you got to consider what your timetable is, because one must balance their school schedule, one must balance their work schedule, one must balance their family, right? So considering all of these aspects and working, and what the last year has taught us is, in this pandemic world, having access to resources. So in order for one to estimate a task, consider the realistic expectations into the production of such a task, right? Consider each task independently. How long is it going to produce? That will help drive your schedule. Consider experience of the assigned resource. Is there an individual that knows exactly how they can operate in rocks? And you're going to utilize and understand the value that comes from that. Estimate in units, right? This one is important because hours, days, this is important. How long is it going to take? How long is your adhesives going to cure? How long is your simulations going to run? How long, right? So you're understanding hours and days. And assume normal working conditions. So when you're developing a task, you got to consider how long it's really going to take. And consider the complexity of it. Consider the complexity of it. And so when we look at the development of a First Nations launch rocket program, a rocket project, right? You look at that image with structured systems materials. You look at all those individual components. A lot of those components can be combined to produce a task. But in order for one to estimate the task, you're going to start to look at them individually. My parts and subassemblies, my nose cones, my airframes and couplers, motor tubes, motor retainers, right? When do these things need to be completed? How do they need to complete it? Where can they be completed? Then you can start to, the project manager, the team lead, start to identify from a project management perspective. You look at the timeline of what needs to be met. You create a schedule. You identify what needs to be done in that schedule. Now, what you identify what needs to be done in that schedule, now you can start to sequence those tasks. What items must be done first in order for the next item to be completed? If any of you that are doing the payload challenge, right? What items on your payload are going to be assembled in order for that assembly to be completed? What is your what is it going to be mounted to? How is it going to be created? So your task dependencies, right? Your task sequence, the relationship, the lead and the lag time. If you're going to order some rocket kits, how long is it going to take? And I know I mentioned it, but one of the things that we are learning is the long lead time of maybe parts that are being ordered, the delivery of when items are going to arrive. I remember I ordered stuff on Amazon Prime, and guess what? It wasn't same day shipping. It was not the next day shipping. Unfortunately, it was delayed, right? So you got to consider lead and lag times for items if you plan to order such things, the constraint on them, and how does that play into your schedule? What task must be finished before another? That's what sequencing is. Relationships, how are these tasks related? And so when you look at your assembly system and you look at it from a sub-assembly perspective, you can identify items are in there, what items must be complete into the development of the completion of that subsystem so that it can be integrated in a system perspective. And so having always, as a team leader, as a team member, as a project, you're operating essentially as a project manager, and you are starting to identify what key areas can be helpful for you. And so sitting down and understanding from a system perspective and how every single subsystem plays a vital role in the development, you can start to emphasize what must be done. It's not just it's just not the completion of hardware, but what about written reports? What things must be completed in your written reports and those objectives, and how when you're developing the hardware, when you're developing the design aspect, how does that play into your report? And so always identifying that from a sequence perspective is so vital and so helpful. And it's a resource and a tool for each team member, and it helps the dynamic and the communication process flow within a team dynamic, because we are working in teams, right? So assigning resources are so important. Identifying key players, identify key individuals, right? If there's an individual that loves writing, technical writing, right? When I was in college, oh, that was one thing that I did not like. I'm an engineer, I don't want to learn how to write. What I realized was technical writing was so vital into becoming an engineer. Technical writing is one of the resources that I place a value in because it's important. But I know I am not the best writer. So when I have a team, I'm going to depend on somebody that loves to write because that is their strength. You assign people, you assign equipment and cost to those tasks, right? Who is going to be the main point of contact? Who is going to be the main resource? Who is going to be the person that is going to quarterback the entire area, right? Who will do the task? There may be some individuals that are very hands-on and oriented because that's their skill set. Individual students are very creative in their own unique way, and they all bring value to the team. And so when are they needed? When and how are they needed? And so when you look at the team structure of the First Nations launch, you're going to have all of these individuals, your advisor, your mentor, right? Your team lead, your safety officer, and your vehicle team and your payload team. You may not have all of these individuals, but you may have some interdependencies. But how do you develop those, and how do you keep how do you lead those perspectives? And so when I said that a team leader often operates as a project manager, and then I also said team member, to be aware of these, because as a team member, you may be operating into if you're a vehicle team lead and you have maybe one or two people, or even you operating into development of, okay, and I'm going to focus on the booster section, and I have my teammate operate on the payload section. What items must be discussed in order for us to produce such a product, and how are we going to produce that? And so even understanding it from a team perspective of schedule, of task, is so vital. Resource requirements. Is there a lab? Is there a faculty? When do you have access to that? When can you have access to that? What are the requirements of the facility? What skill sets are required, right? What specialists and experts do you need to reach out to? Frank's on here, Mark's on here, right? Your mentors, your advisors, right? You're always bouncing ideas. Your team schedules, who is going to be the sole point of contact? What number of resources are required? What is needed for this to be procured? And equipment. What types of equipment do we need? Understanding early upfront and just kind of jotting down and just thinking through this will help drive your project. Now, a lot of you may be developing and identifying this perspective in different ways. Like I began with today's lesson, that there's elements and characteristics that probably you are already implementing, and this is just to reinforce the value of continuing to do so. And budget. Oh, we love budget. We love budget, right? Equipment costs, fees, shipping fees, other costs. Are they fixed? Are they variable? So understanding, and maybe there's some areas in which it's harder to get items because maybe it's a little remote, or so considering budget, considering costs, considering fees is can help the team. So why plan? It's time consuming, but it's critical. It's time consuming, but it's of value. Project schedule management, an aspect of project management, is a critical component into planning and into the management, into the control. So for First Nations Launch, knowing your target deadlines and working to develop a task schedule will help. That's the purpose of today's webinar, is to simply provide an overview and how that overview can be implemented in your team. Schedules are part of the project baselines, right? Critical milestones, completions often are important. Project events that are reported to stakeholders, meaning that schedules are the baseline that can help report to your key stakeholders. Your key stakeholders are your judges, right? Your advisors, and it's First Nations Launch Program. So know in advance what is needed. The handbook is the resource. It's not another, it's like your resource that has what is needed. Schedule development, right? So just understanding, having an overview of all activities, what must be done, what must be kept in an organized way, so that when you go through the development process, you're identifying, okay, then we've completed this. Is there anything that I overlooked? Schedule management is a tool of understanding what can be done, how it can be managed, and how it can be reported. So understand the basics of rocketry, right? Every team member has an opportunity to understand the basics of rocketry, not just the team lead. Not just the team lead. So understanding how one development of one aspect of a rocket contributes to the overall rocketry. And so, there's tools and there's resources that can help. Schedule management, right? Plan ahead and identify steps to determine schedules so that you can alleviate the need to slip up later. Team progress, right? It's an excellent way to keep track. It's an excellent way to keep in touch with team members. If I know that maybe some temperaments of individuals where one loves to be micromanaged and another does not like to be micromanaged, work independently. Well, as a team leader, as a project manager for your small team, you may need to check in every now and then with team members. And so having a schedule saying that on Mondays, I am going to check in. On Tuesdays or on Wednesdays, I am going to check in. How am I going to check in? What form of communication am I going to need to check in with my team? How am I going to be accountable to my faculty members? Is there a tag up? And faculty members, is there a tag up in which you can establish with your teams? Include all the internal and external critical milestones. Are you going to have an independent review before you submit your reports? Ensure objectives and ensure objectives are accomplished within project commitments. This is understanding what is on your schedule, at what time your schedule, at what time are those deadlines within the schedule, and what can be met to meet that deadline. So you're going to follow your guidelines. You're going to follow the handbook and the requirements, and you're going to utilize the tools you are being taught in your studies. You're going to utilize, maybe there's some folks that are, utilizing a technical writing course currently in your studies. Possibly you may contribute to an FNL team by writing a technical report of what you are doing in the First Nations Launch Program. So you're not overlapping, you're not working yourself over, but you're utilizing and understanding the resources because you're looking at it from a systems perspective. You're looking at it from the first FNL timeline, and you're utilizing the tools that are needed and allowing those resources to come up to the top. And so you're saying, okay, I can depend on this. This is not needed right now. In order for me to do this, I must do X, Y, and Z. What you are essentially doing is you are managing the project, whether it's the entire subassembly of the entire challenge, or as a team member, whether it is the management of an individual subsystem that you are overseeing. This is an example of a top level schedule, right? Where you have phase 1, maybe PDR. Okay, and for PDR, I have 4 tasks that need to be completed. And within each task, I can list activities. So this is called a Gantt chart. It's just a type of bar chart that is used to illustrate a project schedule. And there are different types of resources. This was just simply from Excel. I just simply downloaded a template and outlining your phase. When is my phase due? How long do I have? Let's say I have 2 months. Okay, then my task 1 this is what needs to be done. Task 2, this is what needs to be done. And within the task, you can start to list your activities. And you may have an organized schedule already. So to your benefit, you are already ahead. This one I will kind of just briefly highlight before I bring it to a close. Understanding issues, understanding risk, and understanding opportunities. You see, risk management, a subset of understanding what planning for the bad things may occur during your project's life cycle. Unfortunately, that's part of operating in a project. There's always going to be delays. There's always going to be schedule hits. I mentioned earlier about ordering something from Amazon and how it took more days than what was outlined, right? So understanding and thinking ahead about things in advance are so vital and into the progress and the communication of your team. Those are, if you can communicate them, these are things that can keep you well balanced and keep you moving forward. Issue management, addressing events that have occurred, right? How do you communicate that? Opportunity management, seeking good things, building motivation, like, hey, my team, we've accomplished this week, let's keep it going. You're getting ahead of the curve, and you are identifying, you are analyzing, you are planning, and you are implementing. That's what project management is you identify, right? You identify what your challenge is. When you identify your challenge, you look at it a timeline perspective. You analyze it. You're looking at your scheduling, right? You're planning it. You're looking at your schedule, saying that for my phase, for PDR, this what needs to be done. This what needs to be done are your tasks. Within each task, there are individual activities that can be accomplished to complete it. And now you're implementing. Now is an opportunity to start implementing. And so some helpful tools, obviously, I think the Google Suite the entire suite is fantastic. It's a centralized location for Drive, for calendars. It's fluid, it's updatable, right? You can upload photos, you can upload editable documents, right? In Google Docs, and all the team members can contribute, especially in this virtual environment, whether you're remote working together. Google Sheets, Google Slides, and there's a list of other apps. To be honest, I'm not familiar with all of them, but I do know that they are resources. They are resources that are available. There are other communication platforms that can be helpful, especially if individuals like to just be with cellular for cell phones, right? There's individual apps that can be done. And I know Google is another resource that can be accessed through mobile devices. And so we bring that to a close. The objective was to provide a project management overview of simply the management of a project lifecycle from start to finish and the tangible product that is produced. And your tangible product is a successful First Nations launch challenge. And within that challenge, you design and you build a rocket to meet its objective. And within that, each challenge has its own objectives. And within those own objectives, you have different tasks. And within those tasks, you have different activities. And how all of that can be managed, everything that's incorporated in that project, how it can be managed is the art of implementing and defining a schedule, is the art of defining the timeline, is the art of when to apply and utilize resources and how to facilitate, how to delegate, how to depend on one another so that the team can function together to meet that objective. And so I will end here. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, I'll refer to Christine.
Orson, as always, I love your presentation, your enthusiasm and passion about the project, and just really being organized and being prepared for a successful participation in the competition. So thank you. It's always amazing. And I'm so glad that we have this for our teams. At this time, does anyone have any questions for Orson? If not, if you think of a question later, or you, once we get this put up on our tools and tips page and the other team members review it, if you do have questions, you can always send us a note and we'll be happy to answer anything that we can to assist you. And so our next webinar will be next Tuesday at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time, and that will be on structures. And Mark Abatasaway will be hosting that webinar for us. So we are glad you're able to join us, and hopefully you'll take away at least 1 or 2 new tips that you might not have considered in the past. Thank you very much, everyone, and you have a very good evening and rest of your week.